Beheaded. Senator Kerry blasts the Bush-Iraq policy and spells out what he would do. CBS News says it cannot authenticate documents used in a report questioning President Bush's National Guard service record. Ivan is long gone, but the misery lingers on and the death toll rises. And there are more big storms out there. Plus, the return of rickets. Why a disease we thought was wiped out years ago is making a comeback.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Kidnappers in Iraq have murdered an American civilian abducted last week in Baghdad, beheaded him, and videotaped it all for an Islamic militant website. U.S. officials say a body has been recovered. It is believed to be that of Eugene Armstrong, a construction contractor and native of Michigan. The same terrorists still hold another American and a Briton and are threatening to kill them as well, as CBS's Barry Peterson reports from Baghdad.
As a grinding voice read threats of devastation and humiliation for the Americans, a clearly terrified Eugene Jack Armstrong, blindfolded in an orange jumpsuit, lived out the last seconds of his life. The kidnappers claim to be followers of terrorist Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, whom they say personally beheaded Armstrong. Tonight, the kidnappers added a chilling postscript. They will kill the other two hostages in 24 hours unless their demand is met. All women prisoners freed from Iraqi jails. In an earlier video, the men gave their names and their jobs building a U.S. military base. The remaining two are Briton Kenneth Bigley and American Jack Hensley. Hensley is from Marietta, Georgia, where his wife Patty pleaded earlier for the hostages' lives.
The situation they're in right now, they don't deserve. They were there to really help people.
And that's exactly what insurgents are trying to prevent. With this kidnapping of 10 Turkish truckers, the target is America's war effort. Hostage takers vow to kill the men unless their company stops helping the U.S. in Iraq. The hostage taking is bad news for both the Iraqi and the U.S. government. It is likely to frighten away engineers and other specialists from foreign countries badly needed here for the reconstruction effort. And made worse by escalating violence, it forced the Bush administration last week to shift $3.5 billion from reconstruction to security. And there were fresh setbacks for the U.S. In the last few days, two clerics trying to help the U.S. negotiate a ceasefire in the Baghdad slum of Sadr City were gunned down. The message: work with the Americans and you will be killed.
We need to go south.
U.S. soldiers were on patrol today in Sadr City, where every street is a potential battlefield, in a country where insurgents and hostage takers have made every American a target. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Baghdad.
The chaos in Iraq, how it got that way, and what he proposes doing about it was Senator John Kerry's theme in a campaign speech today here in New York City. As CBS's Jim Axelrod reports, while the topic was familiar ground in Campaign 04, today Kerry's words had a new edge and a tighter focus.
For at least the 15th time this campaign, John Kerry delivered what aides billed as a major foreign policy speech. But this time was different.
This policy has been plagued by a lack of planning, by an absence of candor, arrogance, and outright incompetence.
Kerry laid out his plan to start bringing home troops next spring and have them all home within 4 years. To fire those at the Pentagon who've mismanaged the rebuilding of Iraq. And to use UN troops to ensure free elections next year. But underlying everything was blistering criticism of Mr. Bush's rationale for war.
By one count, the president offered 23 different rationales for this war. If his purpose was to confuse and mislead the American people, he succeeded.
Kerry, the war critic, also tried to explain his vote authorizing the war, saying just because he voted to give the president the power to go to war doesn't mean he has to agree with the way he used it. In other words, that it doesn't make him a flip-flopper.
Which to the president is exactly what that makes him.
Today, my opponent continued his pattern of twisting in the wind.
If Senator Kerry's idea was to deliver a once-and-for-all, here's my position speech,
Invading Iraq has created a crisis of historic proportions. And if we do not change course, there is the prospect of a war with no end in sight.
Then President Bush's response was, same old, same old.
He apparently woke up this morning and has now decided, no, we should not have invaded Iraq.
But what's clearly not the same is that 6 weeks out, John Kerry is now picking a sharper, more defined fight with the president, focusing on a war that's favored Mr. Bush so far, but seems to be getting worse each day. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
2 more American soldiers were killed today in that other war, the one in Afghanistan against Osama bin Laden's terrorist followers and Taliban allies. It happened in a remote southeastern province bordering Pakistan. The U.S. military describes the incident only as a firefight against unidentified gunmen. Hurricane season has taken another deadly turn, this time over Haiti. 300 people or more are feared dead there after Tropical Storm Jeanne triggered widespread floods and mudslides. Tonight, Jeanne regenerated into a hurricane and headed out to sea. Jeanne is one of 3 big storms lined up in the Atlantic, along with Hurricane Carl and Tropical Storm Lisa. Lisa is expected to be a hurricane tomorrow. For now, none of the 3 is considered a threat to the U.S. mainland. That could, of course, change. What was Hurricane Ivan left more mud, flood, and a rising death toll today from Ohio to Pennsylvania to Maryland as rain-filled rivers spilled over their banks. Ivan is now blamed for at least 52 deaths in this country alone. Correspondent Sharon Alfonsi is tracking Ivan's aftermath on the Weather Watch.
More than 4 days after he first hit, Ivan is still dishing out misery, tearing homes from their foundations and securing his place as one of the country's most devastating and far-reaching storms, from the coast of Florida to the corners of rural Pennsylvania. At the Bucks County Playhouse, it was rising floodwaters that threatened to fill the theater and take down the house.
So we had an uninvited theater guest.
And Ivan was definitely uninvited.
In New Hope, Pennsylvania, heavy rains forced debris down the Delaware River, closing bridges and pushing floodwater over its banks.
If it had been a foot higher, this town would have been really devastated.
Some areas were. The storm stirred up more problems in parts of New Jersey, West Virginia, and Ohio. Naples, Florida was struck by a twister, and over 500,000 people up and down the East Coast are still without power.
It's just a nightmare, but then I think of the people down south whose houses were totally ruined, and I'm grateful for the house to still be standing.
No small feat considering the scope of Ivan's wrath. The death toll is still rising. Rescuers now searching for bodies in North Carolina.
The number of areas that ended up being under a flood condition over a few-day period was about as large as it gets in the eastern United States.
The insurance industry may end up paying more than $15 billion of claims for Hurricane Ivan victims. This may have been Ivan's final act, but others refuse to make it theirs.
There's the old showbiz.
It goes on. And we're going on with Dolly at 2 o'clock Wednesday afternoon, come hell or high water.
And tonight, the Delaware River has started to recede and cleanup continues. Those costs up and down the East Coast are expected to swell. Dan?
Sharon Alfonsi in New Hope, Pennsylvania, thanks. Now, news about CBS News and the questions surrounding documents we aired on this broadcast and on the Wednesday edition of 60 Minutes on September 8th. The documents purported to show that George W. Bush received preferential treatment during his years in the Texas Air National Guard. At the time, CBS News and this reporter fully believed the documents were genuine. Tonight, after further investigation, we can no longer vouch for their authenticity. The documents were provided to CBS News by a former commander in the Texas Air Guard, Bill Burkett. He did not come to us. We went to him and asked him for the documents. Burkett is well known in National Guard circles for a long battle over his medical benefits and for trying for several years now to discredit President Bush's military service record. Burkett initially told CBS News he got the documents from a fellow guardsman. But when we interviewed Burkett this past weekend, he changed his story and told us he got the documents from a different source, one we cannot verify. Why did Burkett tell CBS News something he now says is not true? We put the question to him. Why did you mislead us?
Well, I didn't totally mislead you. I did mislead you on the one individual. You know, your staff pressured me to a point to reveal that source.
Well, we were trying to get the chain of possession.
I understand
and
that.
You said you had received them from someone.
I understand
and we
that.
did press you to say, well, you received them from someone, and that
Yes.
someone was whom. And it's true, we pressured you because it was a very important point for us.
And I simply threw out a name that was basically, it was, I guess, to get a little pressure off for a moment.
Have you forged anything?
No, sir.
Have you faked anything?
No, sir.
But you did mislead us. You
Yes,
used the word lie.
Yes, I did.
You lied to us. Why would I or anyone believe that you wouldn't mislead us about something else?
I could understand that question. I can. That's going to have to be your judgment and anybody else's.
Burkett still insists the documents are real, but says he was in no position to verify them.
I also insisted when I sat down with your staff in the first face-to-face session, before I gave up any documents, I wanted to know what you were going to do with them. And I insisted that they be authenticated.
The failure of CBS News to do just that, to properly, fully scrutinize the documents and their source, led to our airing the documents when we should not have done so. It was a mistake. CBS News deeply regrets it. Also, I want to say personally and directly, I'm sorry. CBS News President Andrew Hayward has ordered an independent investigation to examine the process by which the report was prepared. The results of that investigation will be made public. This was an error made in good faith as we tried to carry on the CBS News tradition of asking tough questions and investigating reports. But it was a mistake. Now, some reaction to our revelations today. It comes from a spokesman for President Bush, Scott McClellan.
Obviously, there's still a number of questions that need to be answered. We look forward to seeing the results of the investigations that other media organizations have undertaken and that CBS says that they are now undertaking. And we appreciate the fact that they have said they deeply regret it, but we still want to see those questions answered.
And Scott McClellan repeated the White House insistence that President Bush fulfilled his obligation to the National Guard, and he noted again the president was honorably discharged. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, the ongoing taser controversy. A lawsuit alleges he was killed by the popular stun gun, or not police getting taser happy. We'll give you the inside story. Then later, it's a disease doctors thought was wiped out years ago. Why is rickets making a comeback? A Health Watch report. But first, CBS News honors fallen heroes. Andy Houghton, Eagle Scout, West Point graduate, natural leader. He believed it was his duty to make the world better. He ran a Special Olympics and recorded books for the blind. Houghton, who died of shrapnel wounds, told family and friends how proud he was of the platoon he led and their efforts to bring peace.
The surface is just absurd. I'm in my 27th year with this airline, and I certainly have a vested interest in seeing this airline move